But another issue is that horrible greenhouse gas initiative.
It's AB32. It's actually not an initiative. That was a bill passed by the legislature and signed by Schwarzenegger 6 years ago. But we're getting closer and closer to the days when they will start fully implementing the Global Warming, as we call it, Final Solutions Act.
Well, and I tell you, this is
where they want to roll back the greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels, basically.
And it's so stupid. It'll have no effect on global warming. In fact, a few wieners who support this stuff. Did you read the Los Angeles Times? Huge story they had a few days ago about China. Oh, my God. China is setting out so much greenhouse gas emissions into the air that it outdoes the United States. And they're growing. And they don't care because they say, hey, you guys did what you have to do to become a wealthy nation. We're going to do it, too. And there's 1.3 billion Chinese, and the number's rising, 4 times our population. And they don't care about the greenhouse gas nonsense. So it shocks me that all these environmental wieners here in California obsess over what little tiny California does with our 38 million people when China has 1.3 billion, and they don't give a poo.
A poo?
They don't. Well, we're going to talk to Chris Reed now from the San Diego Union Tribune. He's an editorial writer. And I love the first paragraph here. In 2008, Barack Obama vowed that once he was president, a wave of well-paying green jobs would lift the woeful U.S. economy. In 2010, Jerry Brown vowed that once he was governor, a wave of well-paying green jobs would lift the rotten California economy. But as has been documented in the news pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, the green jobs tidal wave proved to be a huge myth. And another myth is that this Greenhouse Gas Final Solutions Act isn't going to damage the economy. And he has examples citing Obama administration officials and California Air Resource Board officials. They know that this is bad, and what's coming is even causing them to rethink the strategy. Chris Reed, welcome again.
Hey, guys, it's great to be back. This is so strange. We're used to talking about the Air Board as a bunch of lunatics, as the guy, the agency that let a guy with a mail-order degree from a fake university run by a fugitive pedophile write diesel rules. That's the Air Board we're used to. But in this case, they're actually being honest about AB32 hurting the economy. It's a real role reversal.
Well, why have they suddenly realized in 2012, 6 years later after this passed, how come they realize now it's going to hurt the economy?
Well, they claim that they've acknowledged this all along. They say that the issue of leakage, their strange term for businesses fleeing California for cheaper energy, they say that they've been talking about it all along. But the fact is they've kind of played a double game. On the one hand, they acknowledge that higher energy is not good for the economy if your rivals don't pay the same high energy costs. But meanwhile, they let first Arnold and now Jerry Brown go out there and say over and over and over again, what do you mean there's a downside to this? There's no downside to this. And they know that the sophisticated media is too dumb to look at this. I mean, the argument on its face is unbelievable. Higher energy costs help the economy. It's simply a nutty argument. But where's James Rainey of the L.A. Times? Where's George Skelton of the L.A. Times? Where's the Sacramento Bee geniuses to point out how stupid this argument is? At least the Air Board is now acknowledging that higher energy costs have a huge downside. It's about time. But where was this honesty years ago? Where was this honesty in 2010 when we were lied to about Prop 23, which would have undone AB 32?
We went through a study a week or two ago which said the energy costs could increase by over $1,300 per family by the end of the decade. That would be an annual increase.
Well, and I think the costs are, if anything, are underestimated. Imagine if everything costs 40% more. If your home energy bill is 40% more, if the products that you buy are built by people who have to spend 40% more for energy, and these are not small parts of the economy that are affected by heavy energy prices. Manufacturing jobs are going to go down the tubes. And what's the Air Board's response to this? It wants to give away these pollution credits that are part of the cap and trade system. Well, if you give away the right to pollute, that undoes the point of AB 32.
Well,
Yeah, let's spend some time on that, because Chris, a lot of listeners, well, maybe not our show, but we actually have a public policy poll, which we're going to get into later, which shows that a lot of Californians don't even know what cap and trade is, but the California Air Resources Board is set to start this thing in a couple of months, and it's going to have a huge impact on business in this state. Let's quickly explain it.
Yeah, because majorities still support the greenhouse gas law, but 87% of the public either only knows a little or nothing about what cap and trade is. Can you explain it in really simple terms that everybody can understand?
Under the law, cap and trade will be set up in California. Businesses will pay for the right to pollute, and then they can sell back and forth between themselves their polluter rights. The theory is this will create market pressure that will lead to less pollution. It's very complicated, this selling off of the right to pollute and this creating a market for it. It didn't work very well in Europe, but that's not stopping them from trying it here.
Basically, it ends up being a tax on these industries. They have to pay money for the right to pollute.
But it's such an indirect way to get to that tax. I mean, a carbon tax, a more straightforward way of just, the more you pollute, the more you pay in taxes is what some people think. But anyway, it's just an incredibly complicated and elaborate system. And just as I expected years ago, this money is going to be grabbed to pay eventually, I think, teacher union salaries and things like that. Yeah. But in the meantime, they can't even realize the money from it unless they want to shut down whole industries. And as indifferent as Sacramento is to the private sector economy, even they can't just say, okay, we'll shut down construction, or okay, we'll shut down food processing or oil refining. These are too big fields with too many jobs. And, if this goes forward, I really think we'll look back on, 11% unemployment as the good old days.
Yeah, I mean, you write in your piece, when will Jerry Brown and the Democrats admit it exists when unemployment hits 15%, 20%? Did they really think that most of the other states would adopt the same greenhouse gas regulations?
I think this is more caught up in Arnold Schwarzenegger's vanity and ego than anything else. In 2006, he was going to get reelected. He knew he was up against a lame Democrat. He wanted to create a kind of international reputation for himself, so he could be this global green giant, Al Gore the sequel. And so he pursued this no matter what. And because it fit neatly with the environmentalist Greens in the Democratic Party, they shoved it through. But this has never, to me, been a rational policy as much as a way for Arnold to get cheered around the world when he goes and gives speeches. He loves the Al Gore role, which is kind of incredible considering what Arnold presented himself as to us back in 2003 when he used your guys' help to get elected.
Government reform.
He is the single biggest fraud I've ever encountered in my life.
And now he's got a think tank at USC. Wonderful.
All right, so the California Air Resources Board is realizing this is going to destroy jobs in, as you said, oil refining, cement production, food processing, as you point out in your piece. So instead of charging the companies, instead of the companies paying for the right to pollute, they're going to give away all these pollution credits for free.
For a time, they're claiming, right.
Well, what's the point of that?
Because they realize that these companies might leave the state if they're faced with these huge credits they have to buy.
Well, eventually they're going to have to buy them, if not, the first year of the program, then the second year or the third year.
But as Chris pointed out, the state's already budgeting and counting on this money, so this is kind of a conflict.
But what's the point of allowing free pollution credits if eventually these companies are going to have to pay anyway? What are they hoping to happen?
Well, you stave off the headlines of, California passes Nevada to have the worst unemployment. You stave off triggering the public finally figuring out that environmental regulations do have a downside. But what's funny about this is it's even worse than we now assume, because back in 2006 we heard all the stuff about peak oil and about the U.S. has to rely on unscrupulous foreign governments, so it's a national security issue to switch to green energy. All of a sudden the U.S. has the biggest fossil fuels reserves in the world because of fracking, and so that argument's gone too. So we're creating a system essentially where California declares a trade war on itself by forcing California to use really costly renewable energy at a time when fracking is turning America into a democratic version of Saudi Arabia.
And explain fracking in simple terms. Sure. This is a new way to get it.
fracking is a way to get at oil reserves, especially in the upper Midwest and in Canada. The people used to say you can't get to it, it's too expensive. But the genius scientists that we still have in this country, thank God, figured out a way to cheaply get to that oil. And all of a sudden, the United States is looking at oil surpluses as far as the eye can see. So another two of the stupid arguments back in 2006, peak oil, we're running out of oil, and we have to do this for national security, are gone. This thing is just a farce going forward because all the original arguments for it are gone. And like you guys point out, with India and China cranking out pollution, whatever one small state does is trivial on the global warming front.
Right. Hold on. I want to get to what Obama's U.S. Energy Secretary had predicted years ago about all this, because I thought this was quite telling as well. Chris Reed is the editorial writer with the San Diego Union Tribune, and he's got a heck of a piece he's written this week, wrote it Sunday, on just how bad this Global Warming Final Solutions Act is going to be for the California economy. John and Ken, KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk radio.